Imagine standing on the walls of Vienna in September 1683, watching the largest army Europe had seen in centuries surround your city.
Engineers, accelerate the
Ottoman
tunnels!
warriors,
Victory
the
is
most
near!
feared fighting force on the planet, have you completely surrounded. Your food is running out. Your walls are crumbling. And then, from the hills above, you hear something that changes everything. The thunder of 18,000 cavalry charging down at full speed, in what would become the largest cavalry charge in human history. What happened next didn't just save Vienna. It stopped an empire that had been expanding for 400 years, and the secret to how they did it is far more fascinating than you've ever been told. Welcome back to From Start to Now, where we dive deep into the moments that changed history. Today, we're uncovering the real story behind the Battle of Vienna, and I promise you, this isn't the version you learned in school. This is about strategy, desperation, betrayal, and one decision that turned the tide of an entire civilization. So hit that subscribe button, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why this battle matters more than you ever realized. Let's set the stage. It's the summer of 1683, and the Ottoman Empire is at the absolute peak of its power. For centuries they've been unstoppable. They've conquered Constantinople, they've pushed deep into Eastern Europe, they've built an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the gates of Vienna. And now, Sultan Mehmed IV has given the order to his Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, to take Vienna. This isn't just another conquest. This is personal. This is about breaking the back of Christian Europe once and for all. Kara Mustafa is leading the largest Ottoman army ever assembled for a European campaign. We're talking about 90,000 soldiers, but it's not just soldiers. It's an entire civilization on the move. There are engineers, miners, artillerymen, cavalry, elite janissaries, and camp followers. The supply train alone stretches for miles. They've got hundreds of cannons, siege equipment that can reduce stone walls to rubble, and they're bringing the full weight of Ottoman military technology with them. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Vienna in 1683 isn't some massive fortress city. The population inside the walls is maybe 60,000 people. And when it comes to defenders, we're looking at roughly 15,000 soldiers and armed civilians. That's it. The Ottoman army outnumbers them 6-1. The Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I has already fled the city with his court. He's gone. He's left the defense in the hands of a guy named Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, who's basically been handed an impossible mission: hold Vienna until help arrives, and nobody knows if help is actually coming. The siege begins in July, and immediately the Ottomans start doing what they do best. They're not just bombarding the walls, they're digging. See, this is the secret that most people don't know about Ottoman siege warfare. They were masters of mining, literally tunneling under the walls and packing explosives to bring them down from below. The defenders can hear them digging. Imagine that. You're inside the city, and you can hear the enemy beneath your feet getting closer every day, and there's almost nothing you can do about it. Starhemberg knows he's in deep trouble. Food supplies are dwindling. Disease is spreading. Every day, more sections of the wall are collapsing from bombardment or underground explosions. The defenders are fighting street by street, trying to hold every inch, but they're exhausted, they're outnumbered, and the Ottomans just keep coming. Week after week, the noose tightens. But here's what Kara Mustafa doesn't know. While he's focused on Vienna, something is happening in the background that's going to completely change the game. Emperor Leopold has been frantically calling for help from every Christian kingdom in Europe. He's sending messengers to Poland, to Bavaria, to Saxony, basically anywhere that might send troops. And the response he gets is mixed. A lot of kingdoms are hesitant. The Ottoman Empire is terrifying. Nobody wants to pick a fight with them. But there's one man who answers the call without hesitation. His name is Jan Sobieski, and he's the king of Poland. Oh, Jan Sobieski is not just any king. This guy is a warrior king in the truest sense. He's fought the Ottomans before, he's beaten them before. He's a tactical genius, a brilliant cavalry commander, and he understands something crucial about Ottoman warfare that most European commanders don't. He knows their strengths, but more importantly, he knows their weaknesses, and he's about to exploit those weaknesses in a way that will shock the world. Sobieski mobilizes the Polish army immediately. He's bringing around 18,000 Polish troops, including the legendary Polish Winged Hussars. If you've never heard of the Winged Hussars, you need to understand what we're talking about here. These aren't just cavalry. These are heavily armored shock troops on horseback, wearing wings on their backs that create this terrifying sound as they charge. They're trained from childhood. They're elite. They're unstoppable when used correctly. And Sobieski knows exactly how to use them. But Sobieski can't do this alone. He needs allies. So he's coordinating with other European forces. There's Charles of Lorraine bringing imperial troops. There's Friedrich of Waldeck. There are German princes sending their armies. Slowly, this coalition force is assembling, and they're all converging on Vienna. The problem is time. Can they get there before the city falls? Inside Vienna, the situation is getting desperate. By early September, the walls have been breached in multiple places. The Ottomans are pushing into the city. Hand-to-hand fighting is happening in the streets. Starhemberg is leading counterattacks personally, but everyone knows they're on borrowed time. They've sent messages out, begging for relief, but they have no idea if anyone is actually coming. For all they know, they're going to die defending this city while the rest of Europe watches from a safe distance. And then, on September 11th, the relief force arrives. Sobieski and the coalition army, about 70,000 strong, take up positions in the hills overlooking Vienna. They can see the entire Ottoman camp spread out below them. They can see the siege works, the trenches, the artillery positions. And Kara Mustafa can see them too. Suddenly, the hunter has become the hunted. Now here's where the secret strategy comes in, and this is what most people miss. Kara Mustafa makes a critical mistake. He doesn't break off the siege to face the relief army with his full force. He's so confident, so convinced that Vienna is about to fall, that he decides to split his attention. He's going to finish taking Vienna while also fighting off the relief force. This is the kind of arrogance that loses battles. You never fight on two fronts if you can avoid it, and Kara Mustafa just put himself in exactly that position. Sobieski sees this immediately. He's got the high ground, he's got a unified force, and he's got momentum, but he also knows he can't just charge straight down the hill into a prepared Ottoman army. He needs to coordinate, he needs timing, and he needs to hit them where they're weakest. So he spends September 11th organizing the coalition forces, making sure everyone knows the plan, making sure the different armies can work together. This isn't easy. You've got Poles, Germans, Austrians, all speaking different languages, all with different fighting styles. But Sobieski is a natural leader, and he gets everyone on the same page. The plan is simple but brilliant. The infantry will attack first, pushing down from the hills, engaging the Ottoman forces, drawing them in, making them commit their reserves. And then, once the Ottomans are fully engaged, once they're locked in combat and can't easily retreat, that's when Sobieski will unleash the cavalry. He's going to hit them with everything he's got in one massive charge that the Ottomans won't see coming until it's too late. September 12th, 1684, the day of the battle. The sun rises over Vienna, and both sides know this is it. This is the day that decides everything. Inside the city, the defenders are barely hanging on, but they can see the relief army on the hills, and hope is alive again. In the Ottoman camp, Kara Mustafa is trying to organize his forces, but he's got a problem. His army is spread out across a huge area, his siege works are all focused on Vienna, and now he's got to turn a significant portion of his force around to face the coalition army coming down from the hills. The battle begins in the morning with the infantry. Imperial and German troops start pushing down the slopes, engaging Ottoman forces. The fighting is brutal, close quarters, muskets and pikes and swords. The Ottomans are fighting hard. They're professionals. They've won dozens of battles. They're not going to just roll over. For hours, the infantry battle rages across the hillsides and through the Ottoman camps. Buildings are burning. Smoke is everywhere. It's chaos. And while this is happening, Sobieski is watching. He's waiting for the perfect moment. He's got his cavalry positioned and ready, but he knows if he charges too early, the Ottomans will have time to form defensive positions to bring up their own cavalry to counter. He needs them disorganized. He needs them focused on the infantry fight. He needs them vulnerable. By early afternoon, he sees his moment. The Ottoman lines are engaged. They're committed. They've pulled reserves from other parts of their camp to reinforce against the infantry attack. Their formations are getting messy. And that's when Sobieski gives the order. 18,000 cavalry, with the Polish Winged Hussars at the front, begin their charge down the hillside toward the Ottoman left flank. Let me paint this picture for you. Imagine you're an Ottoman soldier, you've been fighting infantry all morning, you're tired, you're focused on the enemy in front of you, and suddenly you hear this sound. It starts as a rumble, then it gets louder and louder, and you turn, and you see the entire hillside covered in cavalry, thousands of them, charging at full speed, wings creating this unholy noise, lances lowered. And they're coming straight at you. There's no time to form a defensive line. There's no time to prepare. You've got maybe seconds before impact. The cavalry charge hits the Ottoman flank like a hammer. It's devastating. The sheer momentum of that many horses moving at full speed breaks through the Ottoman lines like they're paper. Soldiers are trampled, scattered, overwhelmed. The Polish Winged Hussars are cutting through formations, and the Ottoman left flank just collapses. It doesn't retreat in good order, it collapses. Soldiers are running, trying to get away, and that panic starts spreading through the Ottoman army like wildfire. Sobieski doesn't stop. He keeps the pressure on, pushing deeper into the Ottoman camp. Other cavalry units join the charge. The entire coalition cavalry force is now smashing through the Ottoman positions, and the Ottoman army, which just hours ago was confident they were about to take Vienna, is now in full retreat. Kara Mustafa is trying to rally his troops, but it's too late. The momentum has completely shifted. The battle is over. By evening, the Ottoman army is fleeing. They're abandoning their camps, their supplies, their artillery, everything. The coalition forces are pursuing, cutting down stragglers, capturing equipment. Inside Vienna, the defenders realize what's happening, and they burst out of the city to join the fight. What was a siege just hours ago is now a complete rout. The Ottoman army, 90,000 strong, has been shattered by a force that was smaller and less equipped, and the secret wasn't superior numbers or better weapons. It was strategy, timing, and one perfectly executed cavalry charge that changed the course of history. Now, let's talk about what happened next, because this is where it gets really interesting. Kara Mustafa escapes Vienna, but his problems are just beginning. See, in the Ottoman Empire, military failure, especially failure on this scale, doesn't get you a second chance. Sultan Mehmed is furious. The largest army the Ottomans have ever sent into Europe has been destroyed. The reputation of Ottoman invincibility has been shattered, and somebody has to pay for that. Kara Mustafa is recalled to the Ottoman court, and on December 25, 1683, he's executed by strangulation. That's how the Ottomans dealt with failed commanders. No trial, no appeals, just execution. It's brutal, but it shows you how seriously they took this defeat. This wasn't just a lost battle. This was a turning point. This was the moment when the Ottoman expansion into Europe stopped permanently. For Europe, the victory at Vienna is huge. It's not just Vienna that's saved. The entire coalition is energized. They realize the Ottomans aren't invincible. They can be beaten. And this kicks off what historians call the Great Turkish War, where European forces start pushing the Ottomans back, reclaiming territory that had been under Ottoman control for decades. By 1699, the Ottomans are forced to sign the Treaty of Karlowitz, giving up huge amounts of territory in Hungary, Transylvania, and other regions. The empire that had been expanding for 400 years is now in retreat, and it never recovers that momentum. But let's get back to the secret. What was the real key to this victory? Why did 70,000 coalition troops defeat 90,000 Ottoman warriors when the Ottomans were supposed to be the superior fighting force? There are actually multiple factors, and understanding them gives you insight into not just this battle, but into how military strategy works in general. First, terrain. Sobieski had the high ground, and he used it perfectly. Charging cavalry downhill multiplies their impact. The speed, the momentum, the psychological effect of seeing thousands of horsemen thundering down at you, it's overwhelming. The Ottomans were on flat ground, partially in siege positions, not prepared for a massive cavalry assault from above. Terrain matters more than almost anything else in warfare, and Sobieski knew how to exploit it. Second, timing. Sobieski didn't charge immediately. He waited. He let the infantry battle develop, let the Ottomans commit their forces, and then he hit them when they were least able to respond. This is classic military doctrine. You fix the enemy in place with one force. Then you strike with another force where they're weak. It's simple in theory, incredibly difficult in practice, and Sobieski executed it perfectly. Third, and this is crucial, cavalry doctrine. The Ottomans had excellent cavalry, but by 1683, their cavalry tactics were becoming outdated. They relied heavily on mounted archers, and lighter cavalry meant for skirmishing and raiding. The Polish Winged Hussars represented a different philosophy entirely. They were heavy-shot cavalry designed to break enemy formations through sheer force, and in a head-to-head confrontation, shot cavalry beats skirmish cavalry almost every time. The Ottomans weren't prepared for the kind of massed cavalry charge that Sobieski threw at them. Fourth, leadership and coordination. Sobieski was able to unite multiple armies from different kingdoms and get them to work together as a cohesive force. That's incredibly rare in this period of history. Usually, coalition armies are a mess. Commanders argue, nobody wants to take orders from anyone else. Communication breaks down. But Sobieski had the respect and authority to make it work. He was the supreme commander, and everyone followed his plan. On the Ottoman side, Kara Mustafa made critical errors. He divided his focus. He underestimated the relief force, and he failed to properly position his army to defend against a major assault. Fifth, and this is often overlooked, intelligence and scouting. Sobieski had good intelligence about the Ottoman position. He knew where they were strong, where they were weak, where their siege works were concentrated. The Ottomans, on the other hand, seemed to have underestimated the size and capability of the relief force. They thought they had more time. They thought Vienna would fall before any relief could be effective. Bad intelligence leads to bad decisions, and Kara Mustafa made several based on flawed assumptions. But there's another factor that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's morale and psychology. The defenders of Vienna had been fighting for 2 months. They were exhausted, starving, desperate. But when they saw that relief army arrive, when they realized they weren't abandoned, their morale skyrocketed. Suddenly they had something to fight for again. They had hope. And hope is a powerful weapon. On the flip side, the Ottoman army's morale collapsed the moment a cavalry charge broke their lines. They went from thinking they were about to win to realizing they were about to be annihilated. And once that panic sets in, it's almost impossible to stop. Armies don't just lose battles because they're outfought. They lose battles because their soldiers stop believing they can win. Now, let's talk about the long-term impact, because the Battle of Vienna didn't just affect 1683. It affected the next 300 years of European history. This battle is one of the reasons why Europe, not the Ottoman Empire, became the dominant force in global politics for the next few centuries. It's one of the reasons why the balance of power shifted so dramatically. And it's one of the reasons why the Ottoman Empire, which had been the most feared power in the world, entered a long, slow decline that eventually led to its collapse after World War I. Think about it this way. Before Vienna, the Ottomans were still expanding. They were still seen as an existential threat to Christian Europe. After Vienna, they're on the defensive. European powers start pushing into Ottoman territory. The empire becomes the sick man of Europe, losing wars, losing territory, losing prestige. And all of that starts here, at Vienna, in September 1683. There's also a cultural and religious dimension to this that's impossible to ignore. At the time, this battle was seen as a clash of civilizations, Christianity versus Islam, East versus West. Both sides framed it that way. For Christian Europe, the victory at Vienna was seen as divine intervention, a sign that God was on their side. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat was humiliating and raised serious questions about why Allah had allowed this to happen. These interpretations shaped how both sides viewed themselves and each other for generations. In Poland, Jan Sobieski became a legendary national hero. He's still celebrated today as the king who saved Europe. In Vienna, there are monuments and memorials to the battle everywhere. The anniversary is still commemorated. And in Turkey, the defeat at Vienna is remembered as a turning point, the moment when Ottoman dominance began to fade. These collective memories matter. They shape national identities. They influence how countries see their place in the world. And they all trace back to what happened on that hillside in September 1683. But here's what really fascinates me about this battle. It's a perfect example of how individual decisions, made in moments of extreme pressure, can alter the course of history. Think about all the decision points. What if Emperor Leopold had decided to fight for Vienna instead of fleeing? What if Sobieski had decided Poland wouldn't get involved? What if Kara Mustafa had broken off the siege to face the relief army with his full force? What if he'd positioned his army differently? What if Sobieski had charged too early or too late, or in the wrong direction? Any one of those decisions, made differently, could have changed everything. This is what I love about studying history. It's not inevitable. It's not predetermined. It's the result of thousands of individual choices made by people who didn't know how things were going to turn out, who were doing the best they could with incomplete information under unimaginable pressure. And sometimes those choices echo through centuries. Let's also talk about some of the myths and legends that have grown up around this battle, because there are plenty. One popular story is that the croissant was invented to celebrate the victory over the Ottomans, with the crescent shape representing the Islamic crescent being eaten by Christians. That's almost certainly not true. Croissants probably came to Vienna from France much later, but the fact that people wanted to believe it tells you something about how important this victory was in European consciousness. Another legend involves coffee. The story goes that the fleeing Ottomans left behind sacks of coffee beans, which the Viennese didn't recognize. A Polish officer who'd spent time in the Ottoman Empire identified them and opened Vienna's first coffee house. Again, the details are disputed, but there's a kernel of truth there. The Ottomans did leave behind enormous amounts of supplies, including coffee, and Vienna did become famous for its coffee culture shortly after this period. Whether there's a direct connection is debatable, but it makes for a good story. What's not debatable is the amount of treasure and military equipment captured. The Ottoman camp was filled with luxuries. Kara Mustafa had brought an entire mobile palace with him, complete with rugs, jewels, exotic animals, and a fortune in gold. All of that was captured. The amount of artillery, muskets, and military supplies was staggering. Vienna and the coalition forces became incredibly wealthy overnight. On the spoils of this victory, some of those captured Ottoman treasures are still in European museums today. There's also an interesting detail about the battle that often gets overlooked. The civilian population of Vienna played a crucial role in the defense. We're not just talking about soldiers. We're talking about shopkeepers, merchants, craftsmen, even women and children, all contributing to the defense effort. They were building fortifications, carrying ammunition, caring for wounded, fighting fires from bombardments, and in some cases, actually fighting. The defense of Vienna was a total community effort, and that's part of why they were able to hold out for 2 months against overwhelming odds. And speaking of the defenders, let's give some credit to Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, because this guy doesn't get enough recognition. He held Vienna for 2 months with inadequate supplies, crumbling walls, and no guarantee that help was coming. He made the decision to fight street by street, rather than surrender, even when the situation looked hopeless. That took incredible courage and determination. Without Starhemberg holding the city, Sobieski's relief force would have arrived too late. The victory at Vienna required both the defenders inside and the relief force outside. It was a team effort across multiple armies and thousands of individuals. Now I want to talk about what this battle teaches us about military strategy more broadly, because the lessons here are timeless. First lesson is that mobility and speed can overcome numerical superiority. The coalition army was smaller than the Ottoman army, but they were able to move faster, concentrate their forces at the decisive point, and strike before the Ottomans could properly respond. This is a principle that applies in every era of warfare. It doesn't matter how big your army is, if you can't get it where it needs to be, when it needs to be there. Second lesson is about combined arms warfare. Sobieski didn't just use cavalry. He used infantry to fix the enemy in place, cavalry to break them, and artillery to support both. He understood that different types of forces work best together, supporting each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. This is military science 101, but it's amazing how many commanders throughout history have failed to grasp it. Third lesson is about psychological warfare. The Winged Hussars were designed to be terrifying. The wings, the noise, the sight of them charging. It was all about breaking the enemy's will to fight. And it worked. Modern militaries still understand this principle. Shock and awe isn't just about destroying the enemy physically. It's about destroying their will to resist. When an army panics, when soldiers start running, You've won the battle even if you haven't killed everyone. That's what happened to the Ottomans at Vienna. Fourth lesson is about the importance of logistics. The Ottoman siege ultimately failed partly because their supply lines were overstretched. They were hundreds of miles from their base in Constantinople, and keeping 90,000 men fed and supplied for months was incredibly difficult. Meanwhile, the coalition forces had shorter supply lines and better access to resources. In warfare, logistics is often more important than tactics. An army that can't eat can't fight, no matter how brave its soldiers are. Fifth lesson is about the role of leadership in warfare. Great commanders can make average soldiers perform above their level. Poor commanders can waste even the best troops. Sobieski was a great commander. He inspired loyalty, he made smart decisions, he understood his enemy, and he executed his plan brilliantly. Kara Mustafa, for all his experience, made critical errors that cost him the battle. Leadership matters. It always has, it always will. What's also interesting is how this battle influenced military thinking for generations afterward. European armies studied it extensively. The idea of using massed cavalry charges became popular again, influencing tactics well into the Napoleonic era. The importance of holding high ground, of timing your attacks, of maintaining morale. All of these lessons were reinforced by what happened at Vienna. Military academies still teach this battle as a case study in how to use cavalry effectively and how terrain can be a decisive factor. There's also something to be said about the geopolitical consequences. After Vienna, the European powers gained confidence. They started acting more aggressively against the Ottoman Empire. The balance of power in Eastern Europe shifted dramatically. Russia, Austria, and other powers began carving up Ottoman territory. The Great Turkish War, which followed directly from the Battle of Vienna, resulted in the Ottomans losing control of Hungary, a region they'd held for over a century. These territorial changes reshaped the map of Europe and set the stage for future conflicts. And we can't ignore the religious and cultural impact. For Catholic Europe, this victory was a huge deal religiously. Pope Innocent XI had helped organize the coalition, and he saw the victory as a triumph of Christianity. The date of the battle, September 12th, was later commemorated in the Catholic calendar. Churches across Europe held celebrations. Art depicting the battle was commissioned. The religious dimension of this conflict was very real to the people living through it, and it influenced how they understood their place in the world. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat forced some serious soul-searching. Why had they lost? Some blamed Kara Mustafa's incompetence. Some argued that the empire had become soft and corrupt. Some thought Western military technology had surpassed Ottoman capabilities. These debates led to reform movements within the empire, attempts to modernize the military, to learn from European tactics and technology. But the reforms were often half-hearted and inconsistent, and the empire continued its slow decline. One more thing that's really interesting is how this battle has been remembered and mythologized differently in different cultures. In Poland, it's a source of immense national pride. Jan Sobieski is right up there with the greatest Polish heroes. The Winged Hussars are iconic symbols of Polish military prowess. In Austria and Germany, it's remembered as the moment Vienna was saved, the moment German lands were protected from Ottoman conquest. In Turkey, it's a painful memory, a symbol of lost glory, the beginning of the end of Ottoman dominance. And in broader Western culture, it's often used as an example of Western resistance to Eastern invasion, though that framing is obviously controversial and oversimplified. The reality is, this was a battle between empires, both of which were complex, multicultural, and motivated by a mix of religious, political, and economic factors. It wasn't good versus evil. It was two powers competing for dominance, and one side won while the other lost. But the way we remember historical events shapes our present understanding, and the memory of the Battle of Vienna has been shaped and reshaped by generations of people with different agendas and perspectives. So, what's the real secret that shattered 90,000 Ottoman warriors? It wasn't one thing. It was a combination of superior strategy, perfect timing, better use of terrain, effective coordination between allied forces, brilliant leadership, and a little bit of luck. It was Sobieski understanding exactly when and where to strike. It was the Polish Winged Hussars executing a perfect cavalry charge. It was the defenders of Vienna holding out just long enough. It was Kara Mustafa making critical errors at critical moments. It was all of these things coming together at exactly the right time. But if I had to boil it down to one core principle, I'd say this was decisive action at the decisive point. Sobieski identified where the battle would be won or lost. He concentrated his forces there, and he struck with overwhelming force at the exact moment when it would have maximum impact. That's the secret. That's what turned a desperate defensive situation into a crushing victory. And that principle, the idea of decisive action at the decisive point, is as relevant today in business, in politics, in life, as it was on that hillside in 1683. The Battle of Vienna reminds us that history isn't just about dates and names. It's about decisions and consequences. It's about people under pressure making choices that ripple forward through time. And it's about understanding that the world we live in today was shaped by battle like this, by moments when everything hung in the balance. Could have gone either way, so the next time you're in Vienna and you see the monuments to this battle, or you're reading about the decline of the Ottoman Empire, or you're studying European history, remember that it all connects back to this moment. September 12th, 1683. 70,000 coalition troops facing 90,000 Ottoman warriors. The largest cavalry charge in history thundering down a hillside, and a victory that changed the course of Western civilization. That's the story of the Battle of Vienna. That's the secret that shattered an empire. And that's why this moment, more than 300 years ago, still matters today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to From Start to Now, and drop a comment below telling me what historical battle you want me to cover next. There are so many incredible stories out there, and I want to bring them to you with the same level of detail and analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.